My name is Elena Hart, and I never thought I'd be telling this story in front of strangers. But sometimes, the deepest betrayals don't come from the hands of enemies. They come from the people you've sat at the dinner table with your whole life, the people who are supposed to protect your children the way they once protected you. I used to believe my family's cruelty was my burden to carry, a silence I had to swallow in order to keep the peace. But the night my brother slapped my daughter across the face in front of hundreds of people, I understood silence was no longer an option. It was supposed to be a joyful evening, the middle school talent show. The auditorium was packed with teachers, parents, and restless students buzzing with excitement. I stood in the back, arms folded, watching my 12-year-old daughter Maya step nervously onto the stage. She held her violin with trembling hands, the same violin she had practiced with every night for months, until her fingers ached and her shoulders hunched from the weight of discipline. She had told me just hours earlier, "Mom, maybe if Grandpa hears me play, he'll finally look at me." Those words broke me. All she wanted was recognition from the man who had never looked at me with pride either. The spotlight shone on her face, fragile yet determined. She lifted her bow and the first two notes quivered into the air. But then her eyes locked on the front row where my father and my brother Mark sat together. I saw her freeze, her chest heaving, her lips pressed tight. Dad leaned toward Mark and whispered, not quietly enough, "She's just like Elena, weak, no follow-through." Mark laughed loudly, cruelly, and added for the whole auditorium to hear, "Like mother, like daughter. Both are useless." Gasps spread through the room. I shoved forward, desperate to reach her, but Mark was faster. He rose from his seat, stormed onto the stage as if he owned the world, and grabbed my daughter's arm. And then he struck her. His open palm cracked against her cheek, the sound ricocheting across the room like a gunshot. Maya stumbled back, her violin bow clattering to the floor. A teacher screamed. My body went cold as I pushed through the crowd, reaching her just as she collapsed into my arms, sobbing. I held her, my baby girl, her small body trembling against mine, her cheek burning red with the imprint of his hand. And then my father stood. He clapped once slowly, and with a smirk that made bile rise in my throat, he said, "Well, she needed to learn some shame." That moment broke something inside me. Not just because of what they did to Maya, but because I saw the cycle repeating. They had called it discipline when they humiliated me as a child. They had called it tradition when they silenced me, when they mocked me, when they told me I was the family's mistake. And now they were doing it to her. My silence had not protected Maya, it had delivered her straight into the fire I had endured. But what none of them realized in that instant was that Maya's microphone clipped to her dress was still live. Every word, Mark's mocking laugh, my father's cruel remark, the sickening crack of the slap was being broadcast across the entire school's PA system, into every hallway, every classroom, even into the superintendent's office. The whole city would know. I carried Maya out of that building as she sobbed into my chest, her violin clutched tight to her small body. I never let them see me cry, but that night I cried silently at her bedside, watching her fall asleep with the handprint still burning on her cheek. And as I sat there in the dim glow of her lamp, I realized the truth: I hadn't failed because I was weak. I had failed because I had given my family too many chances. They thought I was quiet because I was afraid, but I had been quiet because I was building. And they had no idea what I had built. When the house grew silent and Maya's breathing softened into sleep, I poured myself a drink, walked into my home office, and pulled out a file I hadn't opened in 3 years. On the label in bold ink were the words, "Contingency Alpha." Inside lay contracts, ownership papers, recordings, and documents my family never knew existed. For the last 6 years, I hadn't just been a mother. I had been building an empire brick by brick, one they could neither touch nor destroy. And when the time came, I would use it. Because what they thought was my shame was about to become their reckoning. The morning after the talent show, the world seemed to hum with whispers. Parents posted shaky videos online, their captions filled with disbelief and outrage. Teachers sent emails demanding accountability. Even local news stations picked up the story. Family altercation erupts on stage during school event. They blurred Maya's face in the footage, but they couldn't blur the sound. The echo of that slap, my father's words dripping with cruelty, the laughter that followed. It was all there, undeniable, no longer just my private nightmare. For years, I had begged people to believe me when I said my family was abusive, manipulative, toxic. But my parents were masters of performance. They wore respectability like tailored suits, smiling at church, volunteering for community fundraisers, pretending to be the very image of family values. And behind closed doors, they carved me down to nothing. But now, their masks had slipped in front of hundreds and the whole world had seen it. Still, even then, a part of me expected an apology, some sliver of remorse. But none came. Instead, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "If you ever tell anyone she deserved better, I'll make sure you regret it. Keep your mouth shut." Minutes later, a voicemail from my mother, her voice cold and commanding. "You've embarrassed this family enough. Handle your daughter. Keep her quiet. Don't ruin your brother's life." Not a word about Maya's pain, not a word about my daughter's innocence, just commands, just arrogance, just more betrayal. I sat at my kitchen table, my coffee untouched, Maya still asleep in her room. My hands shook, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was rage, pure simmering rage that hardened into resolve. They had drawn the line for me. They had told me in their own voices what I already knew they would never change. And if I stayed silent, I'd be teaching my daughter to swallow the same poison I had lived on my whole life. That night, after Maya drifted off clutching her violin like a shield, I unlocked my office door again. The file contingency alpha lay waiting. It wasn't just paperwork. It was years of records I had quietly collected, tax fraud disguised as family business, audio recordings of my father's tirades, photos of my brother's gambling binges while his wife cried at home. Proof. Undeniable proof that behind their polished facade the Hart family was built on lies. And I wasn't the only one who had suffered. My cousins whispered about loans that were never repaid, about promises broken, about the way my father pitted us against each other for his amusement. I had stayed silent because I thought exposing them would only backfire, that I wasn't strong enough to survive the backlash. But now I had something they didn't. The truth. The next few weeks blurred together. I met quietly with a lawyer friend, slid the file across his desk, and watched his eyebrows rise higher with each page. "Elena," he murmured, this could take them down. All of them." I only nodded. I didn't need dramatic words, I needed results. Meanwhile, Maya healed slowly. The bruise faded from her cheek, but the wound inside her lingered. Some nights she woke up crying, whispering, "Why didn't Grandpa stop him? Why did they laugh?" And each time I pulled her close, kissed her hair, and promised, "Because they're broken, Maya. But I will never laugh at your pain. I will never let them hurt you again." And I meant it, every syllable. What my family didn't know was that the slap they thought had silenced us had instead amplified us. Parents from the school rallied around Maya. Teachers sent her letters of support. Even strangers online reached out to say they believed her, they believed me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't standing alone against the storm. But storms don't pass quietly. They build. And I knew the thunder was coming. Because in the small town we lived in, appearances were currency. My father's reputation was his empire, Mark's image, his shield. And I was about to tear it all down brick by brick with nothing more than the truth they had handed me in their arrogance. And the sweetest part, they would never see it coming. The thunder came sooner than I expected. A journalist from the local paper called me one evening, her voice cautious but urgent. She had received anonymous tips about the Hart family incident and wanted my side of the story before publishing anything. I almost hung up. Years of conditioning told me to stay quiet to protect the family no matter how much it cost me. But then I thought of Maya, the red imprint of my brother's hand on her face, the tears she shed as my parents laughed. So I said yes. I met the journalist at a small cafe downtown, my nerves jangling like loose keys in my pocket. She ordered black coffee, no sugar, and placed a small recorder between us. "Elena," she said softly, "people think your father is a pillar of this community. Are you ready for them to see who he really is?" My throat tightened, but I nodded. And then for the first time in my life, I told the truth out loud. I told her about the humiliation, the years of being called weak the way they had always favored Mark. I described that night at the talent show, every cruel word, every sound of laughter that sliced through my daughter's spirit. I slid her the file labeled Contingency Alpha and watched her eyes widen as she flipped through the evidence. "Elena," she whispered, "this isn't just a story. This is an exposé." When the article came out 2 weeks later, it wasn't just about the slap. It was about the empire of lies. The front page read, "Behind the Hart family's facade, abuse, fraud, and betrayal." The community gasped. Neighbors who once waved politely now crossed the street to avoid my parents. My brother's colleagues stopped returning his calls. And suddenly, for the first time in their lives, they were the ones being whispered about, judged, and pitied. My phone lit up like fireworks. Angry voicemails from my father, venom dripping with every word. "You think you've won. You've only shamed yourself. No one will ever want you now." Texts from my mother, each one colder than the last. "We gave you life. This is how you repay us. You'll regret this, Elena." And from Mark, a single message, "You'll pay for ruining me." But I didn't feel ruined. I felt free. Of course, the backlash wasn't just theirs. Relatives reached out, some to scold me, others to confess they had known all along. A few cousins even thanked me quietly, saying I had given them the courage to step away from the same cycle. For once, I wasn't the family disgrace. I was the one who had dared to break the silence. Maya too began to see the change. Her teachers pulled her aside to tell her how brave she was, how proud they were. Parents invited her for play dates, trying to show her she was safe. And though she still woke some nights with tears in her eyes, she began to smile again. One evening, as we cooked pasta together, she looked at me and said, "Mom, you didn't let them win this time." I nearly dropped the spoon in my hand, because she was right. For the first time in decades, I hadn't let them win. But the Harts weren't done. My father tried to sue me for defamation. My mother spread rumors that I was unstable, desperate for attention. Mark, drowning in debt and disgrace, showed up outside my apartment one night, pounding on the door until the police dragged him away. Their rage was proof enough the story had struck the nerve I intended. And yet beneath the fury, I sensed something else. Fear. Fear of losing the reputation they had spent a lifetime curating. Fear of being seen for who they truly were. Fear of me, the daughter they once dismissed as weak. I wasn't weak anymore. The truth was out there now, and no matter how loudly they screamed, they couldn't stuff it back into the shadows. The town had seen the slap, heard the laughter, read the evidence. The cracks in their facade were permanent. And through those cracks, I finally saw daylight. But daylight can be blinding. And I knew this was only the beginning of the storm. The storm finally reached its climax on a gray morning in late autumn. Court papers arrived at my doorstep, thick, heavy envelopes stamped with my family's name. They were suing me for defamation, trying to claw back whatever power they thought they still had. For a moment, as I held the papers in my trembling hands, the old fear crept in. The fear of being cornered, of being silenced again. But then I remembered Maya's face that night on stage. The sting of betrayal. The way she had asked me why her grandfather laughed. And suddenly fear had no place left inside me. I hired a lawyer not just to defend myself but to fight back. We filed counterclaims with the evidence from Contingency Alpha, the tax fraud, the illegal loans, the gambling debts Mark had signed under my father's name. The very documents I had been too afraid to use for years became my shield and my sword. The case shifted almost instantly. They wanted to silence me, but instead they exposed themselves. The first hearing was surreal. I sat in the courtroom, Maya's small hand in mine, as my parents entered with stiff posture and downcast eyes. My brother avoided my gaze, his once proud swagger reduced to nervous fidgeting. The judge read aloud from the recordings, the slap, the laughter, my father's words. Each syllable echoed in the sterile air, undeniable, unforgettable. The gallery, packed with neighbors and relatives, shifted uncomfortably. There was no defense. The mask had shattered. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, heart pounding but voice steady. I told the court about the years of silence, about the cruelty I had endured, about the way I had hoped things might be different for Maya. I admitted my own mistakes, my silence, my complicity in hoping that endurance equaled love. And then I looked at my daughter, her wide eyes fixed on me, and I said I will not let my silence become her inheritance. The courtroom was silent for a long moment, the weight of the words settling like a stone dropped into still water. For once my parents had nothing to say. My father's jaw, so often clenched in judgment, slackened. My mother's painted lips trembled. Mark's face flushed red, but his bravado was gone. The judge ruled in my favor. Their case was dismissed, and my counterclaims moved forward. Financial audits began, and within months, my father's businesses collapsed. My mother withdrew from public life, no longer able to hold her head high in a town that whispered her name with pity. Mark's debts consumed him, his once grand lifestyle reduced to shadows. And me, I didn't feel triumphant. Not in the way revenge movies make it seem. What I felt was release. The chains had fallen, not with a loud clatter, but with a quiet certainty. I wasn't bound to them anymore. That night, I sat on my porch with Maya, wrapped in a blanket, sipping hot chocolate under a sky thick with stars. She leaned against me, her head heavy on my shoulder, and whispered, "Mom, we're okay now, right?" I kissed the top of her head, tears stinging my eyes. "Yes, Maya, we're okay. Better than okay. We're free." For the first time, I believed it. This isn't a story about winning in the way people imagine. It's about surviving, about refusing to carry the weight of someone else's cruelty, about breaking a cycle before it swallows the next generation whole. My family thought betrayal would silence me. Instead, it gave me a voice. So if you're watching this, and you've ever been told to stay quiet, to endure, to let things slide for the sake of family, let my story be your reminder. Silence doesn't protect you. It only protects them. And you are worth so much more than their comfort. If my story touched you, if it made you think of your own scars, I ask you, please, like this video, share it so others may find courage in it. Subscribe for more stories that uncover the truths we're told to hide, and leave me a comment. Tell me the moment you realized you couldn't stay silent anymore. Because that moment, the one where you finally choose yourself, is the moment your real life begins.